Hi, everybody. So this week we're going to be taking a look at two different theories, specifically divine command theory, which is abbreviated as DCT, and natural law theory, which is abbreviated as NLT. So in this video, I'm going to be talking only about divine command theory, and there will be a separate video lecture on natural law theory. So what is divine command theory? Divine command theory has to do with religious claims. And so our philosophical concepts and critiques are going to dive into the idea that moral values and duties are grounded in the command or will of God. So what you should be able to understand by the end of this lecture is that you'll be able to define divine command theory, its main claims, understand the key philosophical critiques and defenses, analyze the Euthyphro dilemma and its significance. And I just want to mention that I've posted another video on Euthyphro in our discussion for the week. And then you're also going to be able to consider contemporary perspectives on religion and morality. So let's get started. So as I said, divine command theory is this idea that moral values and duties are grounded in the commands or the will of God. In simpler terms, what's morally right is right because God commands it, and what is wrong because God forbids it. So if you have been involved in religion in any way throughout your life, you may have heard of some of these ideas already. So the key thing to know here about this theory is that morality is theologically grounded. That God is seen as the ultimate moral authority, and that without God, moral truths would not exist or be binding. So some of the historical roots for this theory, they're really present in the monotheistic traditions, especially Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They're not as present in some of the polytheistic traditions. So right now we're really just thinking about the religions of Abraham, which is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So some of the key philosophers that defended this theory were William of Ockham, St. Augustine, and some more modern thinkers like Robert Adams. So you can take a look, maybe do a Google search or ask AI to find a little summary, more information about them. Of course, they'd also be on Wikipedia if you wanted to look into them a little bit more. And so one of the main things that helps to illustrate divine command theory is the Euthyphro dilemma. And so that's why I posted a longer video on the Euthyphro dilemma so that you could understand all of the concepts. Really, this just gives you an overview. So the Euthyphro is one of Plato's dialogues. And so in Plato's dialogues, you may or may not know that we have the character of Socrates, who may or may not be a real person, but we generally do tend to refer to him as real. And he is asking this question, is something good because the gods command it? Remember, they had a polytheistic religion. Or do the gods command it because it is good? So this kind of puts us in this dilemma. There's two horns of the dilemma. If something is good because God commands it, then morality becomes arbitrary. God could command cruelty and it would be good. So that could be a potential issue to look into. The other thing is that if God commands it because it is good, then morality exists independently of God, and God is not the source, but the recognizer of moral truth. So more on that later. Why does this matter? So it really challenges the coherence of divine command theory by forcing a choice between arbitrariness and the independence from God. So, what Robert Adams had to say about the divine command theory is he modified it slightly and said our moral obligations are based on the commands of a loving and perfectly good God. So, therefore, God's nature is necessarily good, so God would not command evil. So, that takes care of some of the earlier problems that we mentioned. It avoids the arbitrariness by rooting commands in God's benevolent nature. In skeptical theism, however, human beings are limited in their moral knowledge. Just because something seems arbitrary doesn't mean it necessarily is arbitrary, and we may not comprehend the divine reasons. Now, you've probably heard this before, that God is so vast that it would be impossible to actually understand God fully, and therefore we might not be able to completely understand what he wants for us and asks us to do. So there's some rejection of this dilemma, and that some argue it's a false dichotomy, that God's nature and goodness are not separate from his will. Thus, commands reflect goodness, not cause or respond to it. So, in some contemporary applications of the theory and also some criticisms, we're going to take a look at the idea of moral autonomy versus divine authority. If you're interested in this argument further, the play Antigone, which you can find on YouTube, dives into a very good illustration of these ideas. So, if you want to take some extra time and look at the play, I think it will give you an interesting perspective on moral autonomy versus divine authority, and how rigid divine authority can sometimes be, and how it can lead to some unpredictable outcomes and sometimes some negative consequences. Now, critics like Immanuel Kant argue that morality should come from reason, not from some authority that's outside of ourselves, that moral maturity involves reasoning for ourselves, not just obeying commands. And so sometimes we've heard this referred to as if we're following God and his ideas with this sort of blind faith without question, that could possibly be detrimental. Now, of course, other people believe differently, so I'm not suggesting that it is detrimental. It really sort of depends on what your belief system is, how you were raised, and what you've come to believe in investigating this for yourself. So if you think about these ideas in terms of religious pluralism, you'll notice that if morality is based on divine command, which religion's God defines morality? So this raises some concerns about cultural relativism. So think back to relativism that we talked about in our first chapter, and this can create some moral conflict. Now, if we don't believe in God as a divine authority, or we don't believe in God at all, perhaps we're atheists, then this begs the question, can we be moral without God? Now, of course, you've probably decided that the answer for some of you is yes. And so we'll get into that in our discussions. And there are some secular moral theories like utilitarianism and Kantianism that we'll be getting through later in the class. And so just some things to think about as you're reflecting on these ideas further. And you might even want to journal about these in your journal. So the first question to journal about as you're thinking about these questions: is it possible to believe in God and not accept divine command theory? Question number 2. Does grounding morality in God make it more objective or more subjective, right? Does this lead us back to the idea of moral relativism? And question number 3, if God exists, should divine command theory be the foundation of moral philosophy? So I hope you'll consider those questions as you're thinking through divine command theory and learning more about it. And I look forward to hearing more of your thoughts on divine command theory.